"You should leave. Next time, dress properly," my daughter-in-law Nora said, loud enough for all the guests to hear when I arrived at her birthday party in my best dress. I smiled through the pain and was leaving, until my son stood up and said 6 words to her that taught her to respect me the brutal way. Tell us your city below and hit subscribe to join our global community. Enjoy the story. Let me take you back to how this all started, because, honey, the path to that moment was paved with more drama than a soap opera, and twice as satisfying. 3 months earlier, I'd been living my quiet life in my small 2-bedroom house in Cleveland, working part-time at the local library and tending to my garden. At 57, I'd been a widow for 3 years, still getting used to cooking for one and talking to my cat more than actual humans. My son Tommy was my whole world, my only child, born when I was 25 and married to his father, who'd passed when a drunk driver decided red lights were suggestions. Tommy had always been my golden boy, smart as a whip, kind-hearted, and the type of man who'd give you the shirt off his back. When he'd called to tell me he was engaged to Nora Richardson, daughter of Richardson Industries, he'd said with obvious pride, I'd been thrilled. My boy had found love with someone who came from money, which meant he'd never struggle like we had. What I hadn't expected was Nora herself. She was beautiful, I'll give her that. Blonde hair that probably cost more to maintain than my monthly grocery budget, perfectly manicured nails, and a smile that could charm the bark off a tree. But there was something in her eyes when she looked at me during our first meeting, a cool assessment that made me feel like a used car she was considering buying. "So you work at a library," she'd said, not asked. Her tone suggested I'd told her I collected garbage for a living. I do. 22 years now. I love helping people find the right book. I'd kept my voice cheerful, determined to make a good impression. How quaint. She'd turned to Tommy. "Babe, didn't you say your mom might want to think about retiring soon? I mean, at her age. At my age." I was 57, not 97, but I'd bit my tongue because my Tommy looked so happy. The warning signs were all there, but love makes you blind, and not just romantic love. A mother's love for her child can make her ignore red flags the size of circus tents, like how Nora would always have some excuse when I invited them for Sunday dinner, or how she'd mention, just casually, that she'd grown up with a certain lifestyle and wasn't used to simpler accommodations, or how she'd somehow always need Tommy's attention whenever he was talking to me on the phone. But the real kicker came 2 weeks before her birthday party, when I'd stopped by their fancy downtown condo unannounced with some homemade cookies. I'd used my key, the one Tommy had given me for emergencies, and heard voices from the living room. "I'm serious, Tommy. She needs boundaries." That was Nora's voice, sharp with irritation. "She's my mother, babe. She raised me alone after Dad died, which is exactly why she's so clingy. You're her whole world, and it's not healthy for any of us." I'd frozen in their marble foyer, cookies in hand, listening to my life being dissected like a science experiment. "She just wants to be involved," Tommy had said, but his voice was uncertain. "Involved is one thing, but showing up here constantly, calling every day, sending you those pathetic care packages like you're still 12, it's embarrassing. Tommy, my friends are starting to notice." That word, pathetic, had hit me like a physical blow. Those care packages were homemade soup when he'd been sick, his favorite cookies on stressful days, little reminders that someone loved him. "Maybe you're being a bit harsh," Tommy had started to say. Am I? "Last week at the country club, Meredith asked if your mother was, all there mentally, because apparently the way she dresses and acts screams charity case." I'd set the cookies on their granite countertop and left without saying a word. That night, staring at my ceiling, I'd made a decision. If Nora wanted me to back off, I would. I'd give them space, see if absence really did make the heart grow fonder. For 2 weeks, I didn't call, didn't text, didn't drop by. When Tommy called me, I kept it brief and cheerful. "Everything's fine, sweetie. Just busy with work. Love you." Then came the invitation to Nora's 25th birthday party. Embossed cardstock, formal language, black tie, optional. I'd spent 3 days picking out an outfit, settling on a navy blue dress I'd worn to Tommy's college graduation. It wasn't designer, but it was elegant and appropriate. Or so I'd thought. The party was at the Richardson family's estate, and calling it a house would be like calling the Titanic a boat. Sprawling gardens, circular driveway, enough marble to build a small town. I'd felt out of place before I even rang the doorbell, but I'd raised my chin, smoothed my dress, and walked in with confidence I didn't feel. Because this was my son's happiness we were talking about, and I'd walk through fire for that boy. The party was in full swing when I arrived. Probably 60 people, all dressed like they'd stepped off a magazine cover, holding glasses of champagne that probably cost more than my electric bill. I'd spotted Tommy across the room and started making my way toward him when Nora appeared in front of me. She'd looked stunning in a white designer dress that hugged her figure perfectly. Her hair was swept up in an elegant chignon, and she wore diamonds that caught the light like tiny stars. She'd also looked at my outfit like I'd shown up in my pajamas. "Joanne," she'd said, her voice carrying just far enough for the nearby guests to hear. "You came." "Of course I came. It's your birthday." I'd smiled, genuinely trying to be warm. That's when she'd said it. "You should leave. Next time, dress properly." The conversations around us had stopped. People had turned to stare. I'd felt my face burn with humiliation, but I'd kept that smile fixed in place even as my heart shattered. "I'm sorry you feel that way," I'd said quietly. "I'll go." I'd started to turn away, dignity intact even as I died inside, when I'd heard my son's voice cut through the silence like a blade. "Excuse me?" Tommy had been standing near the bar, but now he was moving toward us, his face a mask of controlled fury I'd rarely seen. The entire room had gone quiet, sensing drama. Nora had realized her mistake immediately. "Babe, I was just—" "You were just what?" Tommy's voice was deadly quiet. "Humiliating my mother in front of your friends?" But what he said next, those 6 words, would change everything. That's when I realized my quiet, gentle son had more of his father's backbone than I'd ever imagined. "She leaves, I leave too." Those were the 6 words that stopped my heart, and apparently stopped Nora's world from spinning quite so smoothly on its axis. You should have seen her face, like someone had just told her Christmas was canceled and her trust fund had evaporated. The carefully applied makeup couldn't hide the panic in her eyes as she processed what my son had just announced to a room full of her high society friends. "Tommy, you don't mean—" she'd started, but he'd cut her off with a look that could have frozen hell over. "I absolutely mean it." His voice carried across that marble foyer like a judge delivering a verdict. "My mother raised me to treat people with respect, something you apparently never learned." The silence in that room was so complete, you could have heard a champagne bubble pop. 60 pairs of eyes were watching this train wreck unfold, and honey, I was front row center for the show. Nora had tried to salvage the situation with that practiced smile of hers. "Everyone, I think there's been a misunderstanding." "No misunderstanding," Tommy had said, walking over to me and taking my arm gently. "Mom looks beautiful tonight, as she always does, and anyone who has a problem with that has a problem with me." That's when I'd seen something in Nora's eyes I'd never seen before. Not embarrassment or even anger, pure, calculating fury, like a cat that had just been denied its favorite mouse. But she'd recovered quickly, turning on the charm for her guests. "Of course, I was just joking around. You know how family is, always teasing each other." The crowd had laughed, that uncomfortable laugh people do when they're witnessing something they shouldn't be seeing. But I'd caught the look she'd shot me over their heads. A look that promised this wasn't over. Tommy had escorted me to his car without another word to his fiancée. We'd driven to an all-night diner in silence, him gripping the steering wheel like he wanted to strangle it, me trying to process what had just happened. "I'm sorry, Mom," he'd finally said after we'd ordered coffee and pie we didn't want. "I had no idea she felt that way about you." "She's young," I'd said, because that's what mothers do. We make excuses for the people our children love, even when those people treat us like garbage. "She's not that young." Tommy had stirred his coffee with more force than necessary. "She's old enough to know better." I'd studied my son's face, really looked at him for the first time in months. There were lines of stress around his eyes I hadn't noticed before, and something defeated in his posture that made my mother's heart ache. "Tommy, are you happy?" The question had hung between us like smoke. He'd opened his mouth to give what I was sure would be an automatic yes, then closed it again. "I thought I was," he'd said finally. "Everything looks perfect on paper, you know? Successful career, beautiful fiancé from a good family, nice condo. But," he'd smiled sadly, "but lately, I feel like I'm playing a part in someone else's life. Like I'm Tommy Richardson's fiancé instead of Tommy Walker, your son. That had broken my heart into a million pieces. My boy, trying to become someone he wasn't, to please a woman who clearly didn't appreciate who he really was. You don't have to change for anyone, sweetheart. I know that, intellectually. But being with Nora, it's like living in a different world. Her friends, her family, the way they do things, it's all so complicated. Sometimes I miss our Sunday dinners and your terrible jokes. Hey, I'd protested. My jokes are legendary. Legendarily bad, he'd teased. And for a moment we were just us again, mother and son, laughing over pie in a greasy diner. But then his phone had buzzed. A text from Nora. Where are you? People are asking questions. Tommy had stared at the message for a long time before typing back. Talking to my mother. Something you should try sometime. His phone had immediately started ringing. Nora's name flashing on the screen. You should answer that, I'd said. Should I? He'd looked genuinely unsure. Yes, but Tommy, don't apologize for defending me. Don't let her make you feel bad for loving your mother. He'd answered on the fourth ring. Hi, Nora. Even across the table I could hear her voice. High and sharp with emotion. Not sadness, anger. Tommy, you embarrassed me in front of everyone. How could you just leave like that? It's my birthday party. You embarrassed my mother in front of everyone, Tommy had replied calmly. How did you think I was going to react? She looked ridiculous. That dress was from the discount rack at some department store. My friends were already whispering, Stop. The word had come out like a whip crack. Just stop right there. The line had gone quiet. My mother worked 2 jobs to put me through college while wearing clothes from that discount rack. She's never owned anything designer in her life because she spent every extra penny on making sure I had opportunities she never had. And you think that makes her ridiculous? Silence on the other end. We need to talk, Nora. When I get home. Tommy, please don't let this ruin everything. I love you. I just want us to have a good life together, and sometimes that means what? Being ashamed of where I came from? He'd hung up then, staring at the phone like it might bite him. She's scared, I'd said gently. Of what? Of losing you. Fear makes people do stupid things. Tommy had laughed bitterly. You're defending her, after what she just did. I'm trying to understand her. There's a difference. But I was also filing away every word of that phone conversation for future reference. Because, honey, I might be a small-town librarian, but I didn't survive 22 years of raising a child alone without learning how to read between the lines. Nora wasn't scared of losing Tommy. She was scared of being associated with anything less than perfect. And in her world, I was definitely less than perfect. The war between us had officially begun. She just didn't know it yet. Tommy had driven me home that night, walking me to my door like he used to when he was 16 and borrowing my car. I'm proud of you, I'd told him on my front porch. Standing up for what's right isn't always easy. It should be easier than it was, he'd said sadly. After he left, I'd sat in my kitchen with a cup of tea, thinking about the look in Nora's eyes during that phone call. The calculating fury, the way she'd said my mother instead of your mother. Like I was some stranger instead of the woman who'd raised the man she claimed to love. I'd pulled out my laptop. Yes, even us old folks know how to use the internet, shocking, and done something I'd never done before. I'd Googled my future daughter-in-law. What I found was interesting. 3 hours later, I'd closed the laptop with a smile that would have made Nora very nervous if she'd seen it, because it turned out Miss Perfect had a few secrets of her own. Secrets that made her desperate need to appear flawless make a lot more sense. The question was, what was I going to do with that information? That's when my phone had rung. Tommy's number. Mom, we need to talk. She's pregnant. Those were the first words out of my son's mouth when I opened the door at 11:30 that night. He looked like he'd been hit by a truck, run over by the truck, then had the truck park on his chest for good measure. Come in, sweetie. I pulled him into my living room, noting how his hands were shaking as he sank onto my old sofa. Do you want some coffee? Tea? Something stronger? Do you have anything stronger than coffee? I dug out the bottle of whiskey I kept for medicinal purposes. And trust me, this qualified as a medical emergency. Tommy took a sip and immediately started coughing. Easy there, lightweight. I sat beside him, waiting for him to find his words. She told me when I got back to the party, pulled me aside, tears in her eyes, saying she'd been waiting for the perfect moment to tell me, and that's why she was so emotional about everything tonight. Oh, how convenient. I kept that thought to myself, but barely. How far along? 2 months, she says. Tommy stared into his whiskey like it might hold answers. We're getting married next month instead of waiting until spring. Her father insists, doesn't want any talk among their social circle. I did some quick math in my head. 2 months pregnant, wants to get married immediately, panicked about appearances. Either this girl had worse timing than a broken clock, or something didn't add up. How do you feel about it? I asked carefully. I don't know. He rubbed his face with both hands. I mean, I'm happy about the baby. I've always wanted to be a father. But everything feels so rushed now, so complicated? Yeah. And tonight, the way she talked about you. He looked at me with those earnest brown eyes that had gotten him out of trouble since he was 5. Mom, I love her, but I don't like who I am when I'm trying to make her happy. That hit me right in the chest. Because that's every mother's nightmare. Watching your child lose themselves trying to please someone who doesn't appreciate who they really are. Tommy, can I ask you something? Sure. When did you last laugh? I mean really laugh, not that polite chuckle you do at dinner parties. He opened his mouth to answer, then closed it, then opened it again. I can't remember. We sat in silence while that sank in. My funny, goofy son, who used to make me laugh until my sides hurt, couldn't remember the last time he'd really enjoyed himself. The engagement party is this weekend, he said finally. Nora wants you to come. She feels terrible about tonight. I just bet she did. Especially now that she needed to play the happy family card. Of course I'll come. I wouldn't miss celebrating your news. Mom, he hesitated. Would you maybe consider wearing something a little more formal? Not because I agree with what Nora said, he added quickly, but because it would make things easier for everyone. There it was, the first crack in my son's armor. She was already training him to manage me, to make me smaller and quieter and more convenient. What kind of formal? Maybe something from that boutique downtown? I could give you money. Tommy. I stopped him before he could finish that sentence. I've been dressing myself for 57 years. I think I can manage one more party. He flinched at my tone. I didn't mean... I know what you meant, sweetie, and I understand why you're asking. But let me ask you something. Do you think the way I dress reflects poorly on you? No, of course not. He stopped, realizing he was digging himself into a hole. You just want to avoid conflict with your pregnant fiancé. I get it. He looked miserable. I hate this. I hate feeling like I have to choose between the 2 most important women in my life. You don't have to choose, Tommy, but you do have to decide what kind of man you want to be. The kind who stands up for his values, or the kind who changes them based on who's in the room. After he left, I sat in my kitchen with my laptop again, doing some more research, because that pregnancy announcement had convenient timing written all over it, and I hadn't survived this long by taking things at face value. What I found made me pour myself another whiskey. Richardson Industries had been hemorrhaging money for the past year. Bad investments, failed ventures, some questionable accounting practices that had caught the attention of federal regulators. The family wasn't just rich anymore. They were rich people desperately trying to hide that they weren't rich anymore. Which explained why Nora was so determined to marry my son, who'd just been promoted to senior partner at his law firm and was making more money than he knew what to do with. But it didn't explain the pregnancy. At least, not until I found the social media posts. 3 months ago, Nora had been in Cabo with her girlfriends. Lots of pictures of drinks and beaches and very little clothing. But also pictures of her with some guy who definitely wasn't my son. A guy whose hand was very possessively placed on her waist in several photos. I screenshotted everything before she could think to delete it. Because, honey, I might be a small-town librarian, but I'd been married to a man for 15 years. I knew what guilt looked like, and I knew what panic looked like, and Nora Richardson was displaying both in spades. The question was the baby even Tommy's? My phone buzzed with a text message from Nora herself. Hi, Joanne. So sorry about tonight. Pregnancy hormones making me crazy. Can't wait to see you at the engagement party Saturday. Hope we can start fresh. I stared at that message for a long time. The exclamation points, the heart emoji, the fake cheerfulness. It was like reading a ransom note written by someone who'd watched too many romantic comedies. I typed back, "Congratulations on your wonderful news. See you Saturday." Short, sweet, and giving away absolutely nothing. Because I had my own news to share at that party. News that was going to make Nora's pregnancy announcement look like a footnote. I just had to decide how much of the truth Tommy could handle all at once. But first, I had shopping to do. Because if Nora wanted me to dress formally, I was going to dress formally. I was going to dress so formally, so perfectly, so undeniably appropriate that she'd have no choice but to find something else to criticize. And when she did, because she would, I'd be ready. I opened my laptop one more time and started typing an email to someone I hadn't spoken to in 5 years. "Dear Marcus, I hope this finds you well. I have a situation that might benefit from your particular expertise." Marcus Chen had been my husband's best friend and was now one of Cleveland's most successful private investigators. We'd lost touch after the funeral, but desperate times called for desperate measures. If Nora wanted to play games with my son's happiness, she was about to learn that his mother didn't play games. She won wars. Saturday arrived with all the fanfare of a funeral march, which was fitting considering I was about to bury Nora's carefully constructed perfect life. I'd spent 3 days shopping and preparing, and let me tell you, when a woman on a mission walks into Nordstrom with a credit card and a point to prove, beautiful things happen. The dress was midnight blue silk that hugged my figure in all the right places. Apparently, all those years of hauling book carts had kept me in better shape than I'd realized. The shoes were Italian leather with a heel just high enough to make me feel powerful. My hair had been professionally styled into an elegant updo that took 10 years off my face. But the real weapon in my arsenal was the pearl necklace I'd inherited from my grandmother. Real Mikimoto pearls that I'd never worn because I'd been saving them for a special occasion. Well, demolishing my future daughter-in-law's reputation counted as special, didn't it? I arrived at the Richardson estate fashionably late, just as the sun was setting over their perfectly manicured gardens. The party was even more elaborate than Nora's birthday had been. White tents with crystal chandeliers, enough flowers to stock a funeral home, and waiters in tuxedos serving champagne that probably cost more than my monthly salary. The moment I stepped out of my taxi, because arriving in my 15-year-old Honda would have undermined the effect, I saw heads turn. Good heads. Approving heads. The kind of heads that belonged to people who knew quality when they saw it. I spotted Tommy first, handsome in his tuxedo, talking to a group of his law firm colleagues. When he saw me, his face lit up with genuine surprise and pride. "Mom!" He excused himself from his group and walked over, taking my hands and looking me up and down with obvious approval. "You look absolutely stunning." "Thank you." "Sweetie, you clean up pretty well yourself." "I mean it, Mom. You look, wow, like a movie star." That's when Nora appeared, gliding over in a cream-colored dress that probably cost more than my car. Her smile was bright and sharp as a surgical scalpel. "Joanne, don't you look lovely?" The pause before lovely was just long enough to qualify as an insult wrapped in a compliment. "Thank you, Nora. Congratulations on your engagement." I kissed her cheek with just enough warmth to seem sincere to observers. "And on your other wonderful news." Her smile flickered for just a second. "Yes, we're so excited about the baby. 2 months along, Tommy tells me. How wonderful that it happened so quickly after you two decided to get serious." Another flicker. Because we both knew that 2 months ago, she'd been serious about someone else in Cabo. "Sometimes love just works out perfectly," she said, her hand moving to her stomach in that practiced gesture pregnant women do for photographs. "Sometimes it does," I agreed. "And sometimes life surprises us in ways we never expected." Tommy was watching our exchange with the confused look men get when women are having 2 different conversations. The polite one everyone can hear, and the real one happening underneath. "Can I get you ladies some champagne?" he asked. "Just water for me," Nora said quickly, playing the responsible, expectant mother role. "Pregnancy, you know." "Of course. Though I'm surprised. Didn't I see photos of you with drinks in Cabo just a few weeks ago?" The color drained from her face so fast, I thought she might actually faint. Those were virgin drinks, mocktails. How responsible of you. Planning ahead for pregnancy before you even knew you were pregnant. That's impressive foresight." Tommy was looking between us now, sensing something but not sure what. "Mom, let me introduce you to some people," he said, taking my arm. For the next hour, I played the perfect mother-in-law. Charming, gracious, appropriately proud of my son, appropriately welcoming to his fiancée. I listened to stories about their European honeymoon plans, admired Nora's ring, and accepted congratulations on becoming a grandmother. All while watching Nora get progressively more nervous as the evening wore on. She kept checking her phone, kept glancing toward the entrance like she was expecting someone. When a waiter spilled a glass of wine near her, she jumped like she'd been electrocuted. That's when I knew Marcus had found what I'd asked him to look for. "Ladies and gentlemen," Mr. Richardson called for attention from the center of the main tent. "If I could have your attention for a moment." The crowd gathered around as Tommy and Nora took their places beside her father. I positioned myself where I could see both their faces clearly. Tonight, we celebrate not only the engagement of our daughter Nora to this wonderful young man Tommy, but also the exciting news that we'll soon be welcoming our first grandchild. Applause rippled through the crowd. Nora beamed, her hand on her still flat stomach, looking every inch the glowing bride-to-be. "In fact," Mr. Richardson continued, "we thought this would be the perfect time to share another surprise with all of you." That's when I saw real fear flash across Nora's face. "We've asked a special guest to join us tonight, someone who's very important to our soon-to-be daughter-in-law." My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Package delivered." A man appeared at the entrance to the tent. Tall, dark-haired, wearing a confused expression and casual clothes that suggested he'd been tracked down and convinced to attend on very short notice. Nora made a sound like a small animal caught in a trap. Tommy looked confused. "Nora, who is that?" But Nora was staring at the man like he was her own ghost coming to haunt her. Because he was, in a way, the ghost of choices she'd thought she'd left behind in Cabo. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, stepping forward before anyone else could speak, "I'd like you all to meet James Morrison. I believe he has something very important to share with us tonight." The man looked bewildered, but walked toward us anyway, probably still trying to figure out why a private investigator had shown up at his hotel with a compelling story about a woman who'd disappeared from his life in Cabo. Nora grabbed Tommy's arm. "We should go inside. I'm feeling a little dizzy." "Actually," I said pleasantly, "I think everyone should hear what James has to say. After all, it involves the baby." That's when Nora's carefully constructed world started collapsing faster than a house of cards in a hurricane, and honey, I had front row seats to the whole beautiful disaster. James Morrison stood in that tent looking like a man who'd been hit by lightning and wasn't sure if he was dead or alive. "Nora?" His voice carried across the suddenly silent crowd like a gunshot. "What the hell is going on?" You could have heard a pin drop in that tent. 60 of Cleveland's most prominent citizens were suddenly more interested in this drama than they'd ever been in any soap opera. Nora's face went from pale to green to white again, cycling through colors like a broken traffic light. "James, how did you... Lady at my hotel said you were getting married and having my baby." His voice was getting louder with each word. "Thought maybe I deserved to know about that before reading it in the society pages." Tommy's head swiveled between his fiancée and this stranger, like he was watching a tennis match played with emotional grenades. "Nora, who is this man?" "He's..." Nora's voice came out as a whisper. "He's someone I knew in Cabo." "Knew?" James laughed, but there wasn't any humor in it. "Lady, we were together for 3 weeks. You said you loved me. You said you were thinking about moving to Phoenix to be with me. Then you disappeared without a word." The crowd was starting to murmur now, sensing scandal with the precision of bloodhounds catching a scent. Tommy's face was going through its own color changes. "Nora, when exactly were you in Cabo?" It was before we got serious." "It was 8 weeks ago," James said firmly. "Right before you vanished like smoke. 8 weeks. Not 12 weeks pregnant. Not Tommy's baby." I watched my son do the math, watched the realization hit him like a physical blow. His face went completely blank, that shutdown expression he'd worn as a child when he was processing something too big for words. "Tommy." Nora reached for him, tears streaming down her perfectly made-up face. "Please let me explain. Is the baby his?" Tommy's voice was quiet, deadly calm. I don't know. It could be. Is the baby his? The silence stretched so long I thought my own heart might stop beating. Then Nora crumpled. Yes, she whispered. Yes, it's his. The tent erupted, 60 voices all talking at once, the sound rising like a flock of scandalized birds taking flight. Camera phones appeared from nowhere, because, honey, this was the kind of drama that would be trending on social media within the hour. Tommy stood frozen for a moment that seemed to last forever. Then he very calmly reached into his pocket, pulled out the engagement ring box, and set it on the nearest table. The wedding is off, he announced to the crowd in a voice that carried over the chaos. And for the record, Mother, you look absolutely perfect tonight. Then he walked straight to me, offered me his arm like the gentleman I'd raised him to be, and said, "Would you like to get out of here? I thought you'd never ask." As we walked toward the exit, I heard Nora calling after us, her voice breaking with desperation. "Tommy, please, I can explain everything. I love you. It doesn't have to be over." But my son didn't even turn around. James Morrison, bless his heart, was standing in the middle of the chaos, looking like he'd been dropped into someone else's nightmare. "So we're having a baby?" he called after Nora. "Because I got rights, too." We were almost to the car when Tommy finally spoke. "You knew, didn't you?" I could have lied, could have pretended to be as shocked as everyone else. But my son deserved better than that. I suspected. The timeline didn't make sense. "How long have you been investigating her?" "Since the night of her birthday party." Something about her panic felt wrong. Tommy was quiet for a long moment as we walked down the circular driveway. "Are you going to say, 'I told you so'? Would it help?" "No." "Then I won't." He stopped walking and turned to look at me. In the moonlight, he looked younger than his 32 years, like the little boy who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms. "I'm sorry, Mom, for all of it, for asking you to change your clothes, for not seeing what she really was, for almost choosing her over you. Tommy, you didn't choose her over me. You chose what you thought was love. There's a difference. How are you not furious with me?" I thought about that for a moment. How was I not furious? Here was my son, apologizing for nearly throwing away our relationship for a woman who'd been playing him like a fiddle from day one. "Because you stood up for me when it mattered," I said finally. "Because you walked away when you learned the truth. And because sometimes the best lessons are the ones that hurt the most to learn." He hugged me then, right there in the middle of the Richardson family driveway, holding on like I was the only solid thing in a world that had just turned upside down. "What happens now?" he asked. "Now? Now you go home, you grieve for what you thought you had, and then you start figuring out who you really are when you're not trying to be someone else's version of perfect. And what about you?" I smiled, thinking about Nora's face when James Morrison had walked into that tent. About the whispers that would follow the Richardson family for months. About the social media posts that were probably already spreading across Cleveland like wildfire. Me? I'm going home to my small house and my library job and my discount rack dresses. And I'm going to be perfectly, unapologetically myself. Because sometimes, honey, the best revenge isn't getting mad. It's getting even. And watching everything come together exactly the way it should have from the beginning, that was better than any designer dress money could buy. As Tommy and I drove away from that disaster of a party, I caught a glimpse of Nora in my side mirror, standing in the doorway of her father's mansion, still in her cream-colored dress, watching her carefully planned future disappear into the night. Poor thing probably thought this was the worst thing that could happen to her. She had no idea what was coming next. Joanne's Story, Chapters 6 to 10. The scandal hit Cleveland society like a nuclear bomb wrapped in designer packaging. By Sunday morning, the Richardson engagement debacle was trending on 3 different social media platforms. Someone had live-streamed the whole James Morrison revelation, and honey, it was getting more views than a cat video on steroids. I was in my kitchen, enjoying my coffee and scrolling through the chaos online, when my phone started ringing off the hook. Everyone from my library colleagues to my high school friends had suddenly remembered my existence. "Joanne, I saw the news." Are you okay?" That was my neighbor Margaret, practically vibrating with excitement disguised as concern. "I'm fine, Margaret. Better than fine, actually." "But what about Tommy? The poor boy must be devastated." I glanced toward my guest room, where my son was sleeping off what might have been the worst and best night of his life simultaneously. He'd stayed over, too emotionally wrung out to face his empty condo that still probably smelled like Nora's expensive perfume. Tommy will be fine. Sometimes you have to lose everything fake to appreciate what's real. The doorbell rang before Margaret could probe for more details. I hung up and opened the door to find Marcus Chen standing on my porch with a manila envelope and a grin that could have lit up Las Vegas. Well, he said, stepping into my living room. I haven't had this much fun on a case since I caught that city councilman with his pants down at the charity auction. Please tell me you have more good news. Oh, Joanne, you have no idea how deep this rabbit hole goes. Marcus settled into my armchair like a man preparing to deliver the best gossip of his career. The Richardson family isn't just broke. They're criminally broke. I poured him coffee and settled in for what I sensed was going to be a very interesting story. Remember how their business was hemorrhaging money? Turns out Daddy Richardson has been running what amounts to a Ponzi scheme for the past 2 years. Taking investment money from new clients to pay returns to old ones, falsifying financial statements, the whole 9 yards. How much are we talking about? Conservatively, about $12 million of other people's money that's currently missing. I nearly dropped my coffee mug. 12 million? And here's the beautiful part. The FBI has been investigating them for 6 months. They're planning to make arrests within the next 2 weeks. That explained Nora's desperation to marry Tommy quickly. She wasn't just trying to snag a rich husband. She was trying to escape a sinking ship before it dragged her down with it. There's more, Marcus continued, clearly enjoying himself. Guess who's been helping Daddy hide assets offshore? Nora? Nora. Our sweet, innocent bride-to-be has been funneling money to accounts in the Cayman Islands for months. She's not just complicit, she's actively involved. I sat back in my chair, processing this information. Poor Tommy had dodged more than just a cheating fiancé. He dodged federal prison. When will this become public? Soon. Very soon. In fact, I might have mentioned to my contact at Channel 7 that they might want to keep an eye on Richardson Industries stock this week. That's when Tommy appeared in the doorway, looking like he'd been hit by a truck, but somehow survived. His hair was sticking up in 3 directions, and he was wearing the spare pajamas I kept for his visits. The ones with little ducks on them that I'd bought as a joke. Morning, sweetie. Coffee? Please, and maybe some industrial-strength aspirin. He slumped into a kitchen chair, then noticed Marcus. Oh, hi. Tommy, this is Marcus Chen. He's the private investigator who helped us last night. Tommy's eyes sharpened slightly. The one who found James Morrison? Among other things, Marcus said diplomatically. I made the executive decision that Tommy had been through enough for one weekend. The federal investigation could wait until he'd processed the heartbreak. Marcus was just telling me about some additional irregularities in the Richardson family finances. Nothing you need to worry about right now. Tommy looked between us with the suspicious expression of someone who'd learned not to trust pretty packages. How bad? Bad enough that you should probably change your phone number, Marcus said. And maybe avoid any reporters who might want to ask about your relationship with the family. Reporters? Tommy's voice cracked slightly. Son, I said gently, you were engaged to the daughter of a man who's about to become Ohio's most wanted white-collar criminal. People are going to have questions. Tommy put his head in his hands. This just keeps getting worse. No, I said firmly. This gets better. Because now you know the truth. All of it. And you can walk away from this mess with a clear conscience and a clean slate. My phone rang again. This time it was a number I didn't recognize. Mrs. Walker, this is Jennifer Morrison from Channel 7 News. We'd love to speak with you about last night's events at the Richardson engagement party. I looked at Marcus, who was nodding enthusiastically. I'd be happy to talk, I said. When would be convenient? Actually, we were hoping to get some footage this afternoon. The story is developing so quickly. Of course. 2 o'clock would work perfectly. After I hung up, Tommy stared at me like I'd lost my mind. Mom, you're going to talk to reporters about last night? Why not? I've got nothing to hide. But what about me? My reputation? My career? I studied my son's face, seeing the old anxiety creeping back in. The need to control the narrative, to manage appearances, to worry about what other people thought. Tommy, let me ask you something. Do you think the people who matter, your real friends, your colleagues who respect your work, the clients who trust you, do you think they'll judge you for discovering your fiancé was lying to you? He opened his mouth to argue, then closed it. And the people who would judge you for being deceived, are those really people whose opinions matter? Tommy was quiet for a long time. Then he smiled. The first real smile I'd seen from him in months. You know what? You're absolutely right. Let them judge. I've got nothing to be ashamed of. Now you're talking like my son again. Marcus cleared his throat. If you don't mind a suggestion, you might want to watch the news tonight. I have a feeling the Richardson story is about to get very interesting. He was right, of course, but even Marcus couldn't have predicted just how spectacular the fall would be, or how much I was going to enjoy watching every minute of it. Because, honey, when someone tries to make you feel small and insignificant, the universe has a funny way of reminding them that you're anything but. The FBI raided Richardson Industries on Tuesday morning at exactly 9:47 a.m. I know the precise time because I was watching the live coverage on Channel 7 while eating my breakfast, and Jennifer Morrison was providing such detailed commentary you'd have thought it was the Super Bowl. Federal agents are removing boxes of documents from the downtown headquarters of Richardson Industries, Jennifer reported breathlessly. This follows our exclusive investigation into the family's financial dealings, first brought to light by local resident Joanne Walker after the dramatic confrontation at Saturday night's engagement party. Tommy, who was sitting across from my kitchen table in his work clothes, nearly choked on his orange juice. They mentioned you by name. Apparently I'm news now. I tried to sound modest, but honestly, I was enjoying this more than a woman my age probably should. My phone had been ringing constantly since the story broke. Friends, former co-workers, people I hadn't heard from in years. Everyone wanted to know how I'd known to investigate the Richardsons. The truth was simpler than people wanted to believe. When you've lived as long as I have, when you've watched people try to fool you with smooth words and pretty packages, you develop an instinct for when something doesn't smell right. Nora had smelled wrong from day one. Too polished, too perfect, too desperate to control the narrative around her relationship with Tommy. Mom, Tommy said carefully, did you know about the FBI investigation when you hired Marcus? No, I just knew she was lying about something. The pregnancy timeline was wrong, her behavior was suspicious, and desperate people do stupid things. But you investigated her anyway, without telling me. I set down my coffee mug and looked at my son. Tommy, if I'd come to you with suspicions about your pregnant fiancé, would you have believed me? He opened his mouth to say yes, then closed it again. Exactly. You'd have thought I was a jealous mother trying to sabotage your happiness. So I got proof. What if you'd been wrong? Then I'd have been wrong. And you'd have married a woman who was merely unpleasant instead of criminally fraudulent. Either way, you'd have known the truth. The TV coverage switched to a live shot of the Richardson estate, where more federal agents were executing search warrants. Mrs. Richardson stood on the front steps in her bathrobe, looking like she'd aged 10 years overnight. Where's Nora in all this? Tommy asked. As if summoned by his question, my doorbell rang. I looked through the peephole and saw exactly who I'd expected to see eventually. Nora Richardson stood on my front porch, but she looked nothing like the polished socialite from Saturday night. Her hair was unwashed, her clothes wrinkled, her makeup smeared like she'd been crying for days, which she probably had. Should I answer it? I asked Tommy. He thought for a moment, then nodded. Yeah, I want to hear what she has to say. I opened the door and stepped back without speaking. Nora walked into my living room like she was walking to her own execution. Hello, Nora, Tommy said from the kitchen doorway. His voice was perfectly neutral. Tommy. She looked at him with desperate hope. Thank God. I've been trying to reach you for days. I changed my phone number. Her face crumpled. Please, can we talk? Alone? Anything you have to say to me, you can say in front of my mother. Nora shot me a look of pure hatred, then seemed to remember she was in my house asking for favors. Fine. Tommy, I know how this looks. It looks like you lied about everything, Tommy said calmly. The baby's paternity, your feelings for me, your family's financial situation, pretty much our entire relationship. I never lied about loving you. No? What about when you told your friends I was convenient? When you called my mother pathetic? When you disappeared to Cabo with another man while planning our engagement? Each question hit like a physical blow. Nora swayed on her feet. I was scared, she whispered. My family was falling apart. Daddy is in so much trouble. I thought if I could marry you. If I could start over by lying to me about another man's baby? I didn't know whose baby it was at first. And when I found out, God, Tommy, I thought I could make it work. I thought I could love you enough that it wouldn't matter. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Until I remembered the way she'd humiliated me at her birthday party, the way she'd tried to make Tommy ashamed of where he came from. Nora, I said quietly, why are you really here? She turned to me with eyes full of tears that might have been genuine. Because I need help. The FBI wants to question me. They think I helped Daddy move money, but I swear I didn't know what I was doing. I thought it was just normal business transactions. And you want what from us? Tommy's a lawyer, one of the best lawyers in Cleveland. If he could represent me. The silence in my living room was so complete I could hear the kitchen clock ticking. Tommy laughed. Actually laughed. You want me to represent you in a federal fraud case after you lied to me about everything, including the paternity of your child? You owe me that much. I owe you? Tommy's voice was dangerously quiet. What exactly do I owe you, Nora? You ruined my life. If you hadn't made that scene at the party, if you hadn't brought your mother's friend to expose everything. I made a scene? Tommy stepped closer to her. You lied about being pregnant with my child, and I made a scene? Everyone knows now. My reputation is destroyed. James Morrison won't even return my calls, and he's the father of my baby. I have nothing left. That's when I understood what this was really about. Not love, not remorse, not even desperation. This was about Nora's complete inability to accept responsibility for her own choices. Nora, I said gently, you destroyed your own reputation when you decided to lie to a good man about the paternity of your child. You destroyed your own life when you decided to help your father steal other people's money. Tommy didn't do that to you. You did that to yourself. She stared at me like I'd slapped her. Get out of my house, I continued, my voice still gentle but absolutely firm. And don't contact my son again, son. He's done more than enough for you already. You can't tell me what to do. This is between me and Tommy. No, Tommy said quietly. It's not. There is no me and you anymore, Nora. There never really was there? She left then, slamming my front door so hard the pictures on the wall rattled. Tommy and I stood in my living room, listening to her car screech out of the driveway. Well, I said finally, that was educational. She wanted me to represent her in a federal fraud case. The audacity is almost impressive. Tommy started laughing then, really laughing, holding his sides and gasping for breath. She actually thought, after everything. I started laughing too, because sometimes the only reasonable response to complete insanity is hysteria. We laughed until we cried, until our sides hurt, until we remembered what it felt like to find joy in the absurdity of life. Mom, Tommy said when we finally caught our breath. I'm sorry it took me so long to see what she really was. Don't apologize for having a good heart, sweetheart. That's not something you should ever change about yourself. But maybe I could work on my judgment. Your judgment is fine. You just needed better information. My phone rang again. This time it was Marcus. Turn on Channel 7, he said without preamble. Now. We turned on the TV just in time to see breaking news coverage of Nora Richardson being led away from her apartment building in handcuffs. In a stunning development, Jennifer Morrison reported, 25-year-old Nora Richardson has been arrested in connection with her family's financial fraud scheme. Sources tell us she was attempting to board a flight to the Cayman Islands with falsified identification when federal agents apprehended her. Tommy stared at the screen in shock. She was trying to flee the country. With stolen money, no doubt. What happens to the baby now? I thought about James Morrison, the confused man from Phoenix who'd been dragged into this mess through no fault of his own. Hopefully, he or she gets raised by someone who values honesty. As we watched Nora disappear into the back of a federal vehicle, I felt something I hadn't expected to feel. Peace. Not satisfaction, not revenge. Just peace. Sometimes the universe has a way of balancing the scales without any help from us. And sometimes, honey, the best thing you can do is get out of the way and let karma do what karma does best. 3 weeks later, I was working my Tuesday shift at the library when Mrs. Henderson approached my desk with the biggest smile I'd seen since her granddaughter's wedding. Joanne Walker, you are famous. She plunked down a copy of Cleveland magazine with my picture on the cover. The headline read, "The librarian who brought down Cleveland's most notorious con family." I stared at my own face, looking back at me. They'd used the photo from the Channel 7 interview, where I was sitting in my living room looking calm and composed while discussing the red flags I'd noticed about the Richardson family. "Look at you," Mrs. Henderson continued, "looking like a movie star and solving crimes like that lady from Murder," she wrote. "I didn't solve any crimes. I just asked the right questions." Same thing. Honey, same thing. But she was wrong, and I knew it. I hadn't just asked questions. I'd trusted my instincts when everyone else was dazzled by pretty packaging and smooth words. And sometimes that's exactly what the world needs. Someone who's lived long enough to spot a lie from 50 paces. My phone buzzed with a text from Tommy. "Lunch today. I have news." We met at our usual diner, the same one where we'd talked after Nora's birthday party disaster. But this time, Tommy looked completely different. Relaxed, confident, like he'd finally remembered who he was when he wasn't trying to be someone else. "You look good," I told him as he slid into the booth across from me. "I feel good, better than I have in months." He grinned. "I have something to tell you. Good news, I hope." "The best. I got a call from James Morrison yesterday." That was unexpected. "From Phoenix?" "He flew back to Cleveland last week. Turns out he's a decent guy who got caught up in Nora's mess just like I did. He's staying through the trial to make sure his rights as the baby's father are protected." And we talked. For hours. About everything. About how Nora played both of us. About what kind of father he wants to be. About how sometimes the worst thing that happens to you turns out to be the best thing. I waited for him to continue. He asked me something interesting. He said, "Your mother must be an incredible woman to have raised a son with enough integrity to walk away from a situation like that." And you know what I realized? What? I spent so much time trying to impress the Richardsons that I forgot to appreciate the woman who actually deserves my respect. My heart did something funny in my chest. "Tommy, I'm not finished. James is starting a software company here in Cleveland. He wants to stay close to his child, be a real father, and he offered me a position as general counsel." That stopped me cold. "You're leaving your law firm?" "I'm leaving corporate law. This would be different. Smaller company. Working with people I actually like and respect, helping build something instead of just managing other people's problems." "And the pay?" Tommy laughed. "Less money, more satisfaction. Funny how that works out." I studied my son's face, seeing something there I hadn't seen in years. Peace. Contentment. The quiet confidence of a man who knew exactly who he was. "I'm proud of you," I said simply. "For what?" "For choosing happiness over appearances. For remembering that money isn't everything. For being the man I raised you to be." Our food arrived, and we ate in comfortable silence for a while. Then Tommy cleared his throat. "There's something else. Something I probably should have asked you weeks ago." "What's that?" "Are you happy, Mom? Really happy?" Because I realized I've been so focused on my own life that I never stopped to think about yours. The question caught me off guard. Was I happy? I thought about my small house, my library job, my quiet life that had recently become decidedly less quiet. You know what? I am happy. Happier than I've been in years. Because of the whole Nora situation? Because I remembered something important. I remembered that I don't have to make myself smaller to make other people comfortable. I can be exactly who I am, speak up when something's wrong, and trust my own judgment. Tommy reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "She never deserved you, you know, as a mother-in-law or as a person." "No, she didn't. But that's her loss, not mine." We were finishing our pie when my phone rang. The number looked familiar, but I couldn't place it. "Mrs. Walker, this is Carol Stevens from the Cleveland Foundation. We've been following your story in the news, and we have a proposition for you." "What kind of proposition?" "We're launching a new program to help seniors avoid financial fraud. Educational workshops, warning signs to watch for, that sort of thing. After seeing how you handled the Richardson situation, we think you'd be perfect to help develop and present the curriculum." I looked across the table at Tommy, who was listening with obvious interest. "What would that involve?" "Speaking engagements. Some travel around Ohio, working with law enforcement to educate potential victims. The pay is excellent, and the work is meaningful. A new career. At 57, starting something completely different. Something that would use everything I'd learned about people, about deception, about trusting your instincts when everyone else is telling you to ignore them. Can I think about it? Of course. Take your time. After I hung up, Tommy was grinning at me like I'd just won the lottery. Mom, this is amazing. You'd be perfect for this. I'm 57 years old. I've worked at the same library for 22 years. I've never given a speech to more than 12 people. So, you exposed a $12 million fraud scheme with nothing but common sense and determination. I think you can handle a few speeches. That afternoon, I went home and sat in my favorite chair, thinking about everything that had changed in the past month. A month ago, I'd been invisible, a quiet widow with a small life, worried about her son marrying the wrong woman. Now, I was being offered a chance to help other people avoid the kind of deception that had nearly destroyed my family. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Mrs. Walker, this is James Morrison. Tommy gave me your number. I wanted to thank you for everything you did. My lawyer says without your investigation, I might never have known about my child. If there's ever anything I can do for you, just ask. I smiled and typed back, just be a good father. That's thanks enough. But as I sat there in my quiet house, I realized something. I wasn't ready to go back to quiet. I'd discovered something about myself during this whole mess. I was good at seeing through lies, at asking the right questions, at standing up for what was right even when it was uncomfortable. Maybe it was time to use those skills to help other people. Maybe 57 wasn't too old to start a brand new chapter. Maybe the best was yet to come. I picked up my phone and called Carol Stevens back. About that position, I said. When do I start? Because sometimes, honey, the universe doesn't just open a door. It gives you the keys to the whole damn building. The first sign that my new life was going to be more interesting than expected came on a Thursday morning 6 weeks later, when I walked into my first speaking engagement and found myself face to face with 300 senior citizens who looked like they were ready for battle. Ladies and gentlemen, the moderator announced, please welcome Joanne Walker, the woman who single-handedly exposed the Richardson fraud scheme. The applause was thunderous. These people weren't just politely welcoming a speaker. They were greeting a warrior who'd fought on their behalf and won. I took the podium, looking out at faces that reflected every emotion from curiosity to admiration to something that looked suspiciously like hero worship. First, I began, let me correct something. I didn't single-handedly do anything. I had help from a professional investigator, support from my son, and most importantly, I had something many of you have too. Years of experience dealing with people who think they're smarter than the rest of us. Laughter rippled through the audience. The Richardson family thought they could fool everyone because they looked the part. Expensive clothes, fancy cars, all the right connections. But here's what I've learned in my 57 years. The people who work the hardest to convince you they're trustworthy are usually the ones you should trust the least. For the next hour, I shared every detail of how I'd spotted the warning signs, how I'd trusted my instincts, how I'd gathered evidence. But mostly, I talked about something more important. The power of refusing to be dismissed. Nora Richardson called me pathetic because I wore discount rack clothing and worked at a library. She tried to make me feel small because she needed to feel big. But here's the thing. There's nothing pathetic about living within your means, working an honest job, or wearing clothes that don't cost more than someone's monthly rent. The applause was deafening. After my speech, people lined up to talk to me. Story after story of near misses, of family members who'd fallen for similar schemes, of red flags they'd ignored because they didn't want to seem suspicious or cynical. That's when I met Eleanor Hayes. She was 82, impeccably dressed, and carrying herself with the kind of dignity that comes from weathering life's storms with grace. She waited until everyone else had gone before approaching me. Mrs. Walker, I have a situation I think you might find familiar. Something in her tone made me pay close attention. What kind of situation? The kind where my own family thinks I'm too old and too gullible to manage my own affairs. They've convinced me to sign papers, make financial decisions, trust people I probably shouldn't trust. And now I'm wondering if I've been as foolish as they think I am. I gave her my full attention. Tell me everything. Eleanor's story unfolded like a masterclass in financial elder abuse, except the abusers weren't strangers. They were her own children and grandchildren. My late husband left me very comfortable, she explained. $3 million plus real estate. But my daughter Victoria convinced me I needed professional management of my assets. Her husband Kevin runs an investment firm. Warning bells started ringing in my head. They've moved my money into accounts I can't access, sold my house, and moved me into senior living, and now they give me a monthly allowance from my own assets. When I asked to see the financial statements, Victoria said I wouldn't understand them anyway. Eleanor, how much of your money can you actually access right now? The allowance, $5,000 a month. And your total assets were $3 million? Yes, I did some quick math. Even conservatively invested, $3 million should generate more than $60,000 a year in income. Eleanor was being given less than a quarter of what her money should be earning. Have you seen any statements? Any proof that your money is actually where they say it is? Eleanor shook her head. Kevin says it's all too complicated for me to understand. He gives me these simplified reports that don't show actual account numbers or balances. Every instinct I'd developed was screaming. This wasn't financial management. This was theft. Sophisticated, family-enabled theft, but theft nonetheless. Eleanor, would you be willing to meet with me privately to go over everything in detail? Would you really do that? Honey, helping people like you is exactly why I took this job. 3 days later, Eleanor came to my house with a box of papers. What I found in those documents made the Richardson scheme look like pocket change. Kevin Hayes hadn't just mismanaged Eleanor's money. He'd systematically looted it. Fake investment statements, forged documents, assets that had been sold without her knowledge. The senior living facility wasn't just expensive. It was owned by a company Kevin controlled, meaning Eleanor was essentially paying rent to her own stolen money. But the worst part was the psychological manipulation. Every document was designed to make Eleanor feel incompetent, confused, dependent on their expertise. Eleanor, I said gently, how long has this been going on? 2 years, since Richard died. And in those 2 years, have you ever felt like yourself? Like the intelligent, capable woman you were before? Her eyes filled with tears. I thought I was losing my mind. I thought grief had made me stupid. You're not stupid. You're being victimized by people who know exactly how to exploit your trust and your love for your family. That's when Eleanor asked the question that changed everything. Joanne, would you help me get my life back? I looked at this dignified woman who'd been systematically robbed by her own children, who'd been made to feel guilty for wanting to control her own money, who'd been convinced she was too old and confused to make her own decisions. Eleanor, I said, I thought you'd never ask. Because sometimes, honey, the universe doesn't just give you a second act, it gives you a mission. And Victoria Hayes was about to learn that stealing from little old ladies isn't quite as easy when one of those little old ladies fights back. 6 months later, I stood on the steps of the federal courthouse, watching Victoria Hayes and her husband Kevin being led away in handcuffs, just like Nora Richardson had been. But this victory felt different, sweeter, because this time I hadn't just exposed a fraud, I'd given a remarkable woman her life back. Eleanor stood beside me, no longer the confused, diminished person I'd met at my first speaking engagement. She was wearing a red coat that cost more than my car, paid for with her own money, from her own accounts that she controlled completely. Well, she said with a smile that could have powered a small city, that was satisfying. How satisfying. Watching my daughter learn that theft is still theft, even when you steal from family? Priceless. The media scrum was intense. Eleanor's case had attracted national attention, partly because of the amount of money involved, $2.8 million that Kevin Hayes had systematically stolen over 2 years, but mostly because it had become the poster case for financial elder abuse. And somehow I'd become the face of fighting back. Mrs. Walker, a reporter called out, how does it feel to have helped expose another major fraud case? It feels like we're just getting started, I replied. Because we were. In the 6 months since I'd taken the position with Cleveland Foundation, I'd spoken to over 50 groups, consulted on dozens of suspected fraud cases, and helped law enforcement develop new protocols for investigating family financial abuse. But more importantly, I'd helped people like Eleanor remember who they were underneath the manipulation and gaslighting. The thing people don't understand, I'd told the prosecutor during Kevin Hayes' trial, is that financial elder abuse isn't just about money. It's about stealing someone's sense of self-worth, their confidence, their belief in their own judgment. These criminals don't just rob bank accounts, they rob dignity. Tommy appeared at my elbow as the crowd started to disperse. He'd been in the courtroom for the verdict, supporting me the way I'd always supported him. How does it feel, Mom, knowing you've helped bring down 2 major fraud schemes in less than a year? I thought about that question as we walked to his car. How did it feel? It felt like I'd finally figured out what I was supposed to be doing with my life. It feels like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. Even though it's dangerous? Even though you're getting death threats from some of these families? Especially because of that. Because if they're that desperate to silence me, it means I'm making a difference. We drove to the diner where this whole journey had started, where Tommy had first told me about Nora's pregnancy, where I'd first realized my quiet son had lost himself trying to please someone who didn't deserve him. I have news, Tommy said, as we settled into our usual booth. Good news, I hope. The best. James's company is expanding. We're opening offices in 3 more cities, and I'm going to head up the legal department for the entire operation. Tommy, that's wonderful. And there's more. James is getting married next month, to a woman who's nothing like Nora. She's kind, honest, funny, and she actually likes him for who he is instead of what he can do for her. What about the baby? Healthy, happy, and going to have 2 parents who love him and a stepmother who thinks he's the best thing since sliced bread. Sometimes life has a way of working out exactly as it should. And what about you? Tommy asked. Any thoughts of dating? Finding someone to share all this excitement with? I laughed. Sweetie, I'm 58 years old. I travel constantly for work, and I spend my free time investigating fraud schemes. What kind of man would want to date that? The right kind, Tommy said seriously. The kind who'd appreciate having a brilliant, fearless woman in his life. As if summoned by our conversation, my phone rang. Marcus Chen. Joanne, I have a case I think you'll find interesting. What kind of case? Remember the Richardson family? Turns out they had partners. Other families, other cities, all running similar schemes. The FBI wants to know if you'd be interested in consulting on a multi-state investigation. I looked across the table at Tommy, who was grinning like he just won the lottery. How many states? 7, maybe more. This could be the biggest elder fraud case in the country's history. When do we start? After I hung up, Tommy shook his head in amazement. A year ago, you were worried about me marrying the wrong woman. Now you're helping the FBI investigate multi-state fraud rings. Life's funny that way. Are you scared? This sounds huge. I thought about Nora Richardson, trying to make me feel small and pathetic. About Victoria Hayes, stealing her mother's dignity along with her money. About all the other people out there who thought they could take advantage of those they saw as weak and powerless. No, I said. I'm not scared. I'm ready. Because here's what I'd learned in the past year. There's nothing more dangerous than someone who's been underestimated their whole life and finally decides to stop playing small. I was 58 years old. I wore clothes from discount racks. I worked for honest money. And I had absolutely nothing left to lose, which made me exactly the kind of person criminals should be afraid of. As Tommy and I left the diner, my phone buzzed with a text from Eleanor. Thank you for giving me back my life. Now let's go give some other people back theirs. I smiled and typed back, and typed, ready when you are. Because sometimes, honey, the best revenge isn't getting even. It's becoming exactly who you were always meant to be. And I was just getting started. The woman who'd been dismissed as pathetic by Nora Richardson was now hunting down fraud schemes across 7 states. The quiet librarian who'd been told to dress properly was now the face of fighting financial elder abuse. Turns out, all I needed was for someone to underestimate me badly enough to wake up the fighter I'd always been. And for the criminals still out there thinking they can prey on people like me, well, let's just say they have no idea what's coming for them. But they're about to find out.